Hey guys, this is Mark. I want to read you from the AFL-CIO's press release from this last Monday. The U.S. Treasury Department has approved the United Furniture Workers Pension Fund's application for a benefits reduction, making it only the second pension fund to be approved for a benefits cut under the Klein-Miller Multi-Employer Pension Relief Act of 2014. The plan's trustees' proposal includes reducing benefits to 110% of the PBGC guarantee, excluding disabled retirees or those who will be older than 80 as of September 30th, 2017. The percentage reductions range from 0% to 62%, and of the fund's 9,896 participants, 7,078 would see no reduction. For the other 2,818, the average reduction would be 12.7%. Now, there is no love lost between me and the AFL-CIO, but this news does represent, in my opinion, a crime against middle-class workers perpetuated by Wall Street and their servants in the Bush-Obama administration. And yes, I mean to say administration singular, for on this issue they were one. My fear is that Trump will join them. We'll see. But first, let me talk about the damage. They say the average rate for over 2,500 retirees is 12.7%. Now, imagine losing your income, by the way, by over a tenth. That would probably affect you. Maybe it doesn't seem like much, but by the way, it means that a small number are probably having their promised income cut by over half. In fact, we know it does because it says the maximum cut is 62%. What would happen to your family if suddenly your income were cut in half? That would be catastrophic for most everyone. To give you an idea of how this works, let me read to you an article from earlier about another pension fund that was mentioned by the Eagle Rising blog. This one hasn't been cut yet, but it soon will be. The CBS News story the Eagle Rising blog cites, it begins this way. February was a bad month for Larry Burrell. His name is spelled B-U-R-R-U-E-L, so I hope that's how I pronounce it. I don't know. Anyway, it was a bad month for him and thousands of other retired Ohio iron workers. His monthly take-home pension was cut by more than half, from $3,700 to $1,600. Things have been rough in the Rust Belt, but this was a particularly powerful punch in the pocketbook for Burrell, who started in the trade at 19 and worked 36 years before opting for early retirement to make way for younger workers. Unfortunately, this sagging industry doesn't have enough younger workers to pay for retirees like Burrell, whose pension plan is in what the U.S. Treasury Department calls critical and declining status. By the way, I'll break away from my script just to say, you notice that they insert the idea in there that of course a pension isn't supposed to provide enough funds for only the person who's working. Rather, it's a big Ponzi scheme. They're supposed to provide funds for the people who've already retired. Well, what happened to the contributions by the people who retired? I mean, this whole thing is insane. All right, now we break away back to the story. Burrell and 4,000 members, and the 4,000 members of his Cleveland Iron Workers Local 17 pension plan are the canaries in the coal mine as far as pension cutbacks go. So there's more to come. It continues, at least 50 Midwestern pension plans, mostly the kind jointly administered by trustees for a labor union and a group of employers, are in this decrepit condition. Several plan sponsors have already applied to the Treasury Department to cut back retirees' allotments. So that story from the AFL-CIO was just one of many to come. Now, I admit, I kind of want to criticize Burrell. I mean, while he's down, that's kind of unfair. But, I feel like he should have known the retirement he was promised was too good to be true. But really, that doesn't matter. The more important issue is that someone lied to him to get him to work for a reward that he would never get. the article continues a little further down. For now, both healthy public pension funds and private pension funds aren't at risk. Well, they probably didn't tell us that any of the others were at risk a couple of years ago. But for those who are affected, it hurts a lot, said Pat Overstreet of Hinckley, Ohio. She and her former iron worker husband refinanced their home to pay for their daughter's brain tumor treatment. But since his pension has been cut from $2,500 a month to $930, I assume a month, they may lose their house, she said. Yeah, I'll bet. And the story goes on. A little bit later, for the iron workers, that meant battling to save what they could. Not only against Attorney Feinberg, now I skipped the part about him, but he's basically a government hack appointed to rubber stamp these cuts. But also their struggle, they're battling to save what they could. They're doing so, quote, against part of their own membership, the disabled and those over the age of 80. Burrell believes his nearly 60% monthly payment cut is unfair and that it should be 20% across the board. But inevitably, certain groups are favored over others. One reason the former union leadership was voted out, he said. This type of dissension will likely spill into union halls across the Midwest as more and more plans are slashed. We are pitted against each other, said Overstreet. Those who work the hardest made the most are going to get hit the worst. Now they never explained that, but presumably that means that there are people who are offered bonuses in the future if they worked harder in the present, or in the past now, but you know what I mean. So basically the people who mostly were most intent on saving for the future are going to actually get screwed the worst. I haven't found any other data on that, but that seems to be the indication here. No one should have accepted a deal that involved a promise in the future. No one gets put in prison, at least no one who knows what they're doing, for not sufficiently funding a pension. They just get to do that and get away with it. It is a completely unenforceable promise. But the reason these pensions are failing so spectacularly goes beyond the problem of enforcement and incentives. It is because of quantitative easing practiced by the Federal Reserve. It is because the Fed has been shoving interest rates so extremely low. This was all spelled out on March 24th at Bloomberg.com by Danielle DiMartino Booth. She writes that, quote, unfunded pension obligations have risen to $1.9 trillion from $292 billion since 2007. Now I think she's talking there about public pensions, but I believe the same things would happen in private pensions as well. The point is, most of the dramatic increase in the unfunded obligations goes back to the financial crisis and then the Wall Street bailout and, more importantly than TARP, the Federal Reserve's shoving interest rates into the floor, to zero, effectively. So Booth writes some more, and her points apply. I mean, she's talking about public pensions, but they would apply more broadly. She says, Federal Reserve data show that in 1952, the average public pension had 96% of its portfolio invested in bonds and cash equivalents. Assets matched future liabilities. But a loosening of state laws in the 1980s, think Reagan Revolution, opened the door to riskier investments. In 1992, fixed income and cash had fallen to an average of 47% of holdings. By 2016, these safe investments had declined to 27%. Now this is why I think this must also apply to these pensions we're talking about here. She goes on to say, it's no coincidence, that pensions' flight from safety has coincided with the drop in interest rates. So these safe investments don't give you anything, and don't, if you've been planning to support so many retirees with so much money, and then suddenly all these bonds stop bearing interest, what's going to happen? Low interest rates, the Federal Reserve's one and only means of bailing out Wall Street banks, force pensions to either make virtually no money in safe bonds quote-unquote safe, or else gamble in the stock market. Workers' pensions have been made insolvent to keep Wall Street solvent. And so now we see the first few hundred or thousand retirees, we're not really told quite how many, suddenly have the future they were told they would get massively cut. This was the future they were promised, the future they were depending on if they worked for it. They worked like they were supposed to, and now when it is way too late to do anything about it, that future has been taken away from them. This was done intentionally. This is an entirely predictable result of the policies of Ben Bernanke and continued by Janet Yellen at the Federal Reserve. What can be done about this now? Not much. These pensions don't have enough money to pay out what the workers were promised. You can't change that reality. But we can realize that when people who hold temporary office make promises about the future that will arrive long after they will have left office, there is no reason to trust them. The union leadership got elected to office because they promised union benefits to workers. Politicians made promises to public unions to get elected. In both cases, it was in the interest of people seeking office to promise such benefits. It wasn't in their interest to make sure those promises could be fulfilled because that would limit what was promised. We can also remember this when someone accuses a politician of believing in so-called trickle-down economics. Usually that term is meant to accuse someone when he wants to lower taxes, supposedly of rich people. Now personally, I think everyone's taxes should be zero. But that's a minority viewpoint at this time. Most of you, all out there in YouTube land, think that human civilization depends on regional monopoly corporations with a right to coerce people. So I will point out that trying to help the economy within such a context means that a tax break for the rich will probably be more likely to be used to invest in jobs than a tax break for the lower or middle class. I don't like it, but that seems reasonable. Since the rich are paying most of the total tax revenues already, I don't understand why the idea is dismissed with such moral outrage. But this Federal Reserve tactic of plundering working and middle class retirements for the sake of Wall Street is always justified as good for the economy. In other words, it is truly a trickle-down ideology. As George Will wrote about President Obama in 2013, quote, Obama's speech denounced a trickle-down ideology and deplored growth that has flowed for a fortunate few. But the monetary policy he favors, very low interest rates driving money into equities in search of higher yields, is a powerful engine of inequality. Since the Dow closed at 7,949 on Inauguration Day of 2009, it has doubled, benefiting the 10% who hold 80% of the directly owned stocks. The hope is that some of the wealth will trickle down. So there you go. Lowering taxes is mocked as trickle down, but the insult isn't applied to the Federal Reserve starting a landslide in pension cuts that has only just begun. All of this is mainstream news, but the mainstream media doesn't care. They are too busy peddling Russia conspiracy stories or telling us that we need to start funding the CIA's terrorists in Syria. I'm afraid the real threats to us are a lot closer at home. They are decisions made by people who could not care less what happens to retirees in Hinckley, Ohio. Well, that's it for now. I hope you'll like this video, share it a lot, and subscribe to the channel. There'll be more to come. Thanks a lot, guys.